Welcome back, my dear listener. In today's world, nearly 1 in 3 Americans don't get enough sleep. From night shift workers to college students cramming for exams, to busy professionals chasing deadlines, sleep often feels like a luxury. But here's the question we'll explore tonight. What truly happens if you never sleep? And why is this one problem quietly destroying our focus, our health, and even our lifespan? Every night, as we close our eyes, a silent orchestra begins to play inside the human body. Sleep, often dismissed as unproductive time, is in fact one of the most powerful forces shaping our health, our memory, and our very survival. But what if we never closed our eyes? What if, night after night, we simply refuse to sleep? When we think about human survival, the first things that usually come to mind are food, water, and air. These are the basic needs that sustain life. But there is one other necessity, often underestimated, and yet just as essential: sleep. Sleep is not simply the absence of wakefulness, not merely an empty stretch of hours when nothing happens. It is, in truth, one of the most active and complex processes our bodies perform, a biological rhythm that is as vital to life as the beating of the heart or the firing of neurons in the brain. Without it, the mind and body begin to unravel in ways both subtle and profound. For centuries, philosophers, scientists, and physicians have tried to understand why we sleep. In ancient times, some believed that sleep was a temporary retreat of the soul, a nightly separation between spirit and body. Others saw it as the brain's way of cooling down after the heat of daily thought. Modern science has revealed far more, that sleep is not a passive collapse into unconsciousness, but a highly coordinated symphony in which every organ, every cell, participates. Sleep repairs, restores, balances, and integrates the functions that keep us alive. Inside the brain, sleep acts like a reset switch. Throughout the day, as we move, think, solve problems, and process emotions, the brain is constantly building up byproducts of activity. Tiny molecules of waste accumulate between neurons, slowing down the delicate electrical circuits that carry our thoughts. During sleep, a special system called the glymphatic system opens wide, flushing these toxins out, almost as though the brain were washing itself clean. Imagine the way a city clears its streets at night, sweeping away the debris of daily traffic. Without this nightly cleansing, toxins build up and brain function begins to stumble. This is why sleep deprivation can make us feel cloudy, unfocused, and even lost in our own thoughts. But sleep is more than just a cleaning service for the brain. It is also the great librarian of memory. Every experience you have, every fact you learn, every emotion you feel, is first written down in the fragile ink of short-term memory. If left untouched, those memories may fade like words written on sand. During sleep, however, the brain replays, organizes, and transfers these memories into long-term storage. It is as if your mind were filing away the day's events, keeping what is important, discarding what is not, and connecting new knowledge to old. This process happens most intensely during certain stages of sleep, such as rapid eye movement, or REM sleep, when the brain lights up almost as if it were awake, weaving together fragments of memory and emotion into the mysterious tapestry of dreams. Beyond memory, sleep also shapes the very architecture of the brain itself. In children and teenagers, sleep drives growth, pruning unnecessary connections and strengthening the ones that matter, like a gardener trimming a tree to help it flourish. In adults, the same process keeps the brain flexible, adaptable, and creative. Without sleep, learning becomes harder, decision-making falters, and emotional control begins to slip away. This is why someone who has gone a night without rest may find themselves more irritable, more forgetful, and more prone to mistakes. The role of sleep is not confined to the brain alone. The body, too, relies on it in countless ways. Deep in our bloodstream, sleep regulates the production of hormones that govern appetite, metabolism, growth, and repair. For example, during deep stages of sleep, the body releases growth hormone, which stimulates tissue repair, muscle recovery, and bone strength. This is why athletes often speak of sleep as the hidden training ground, as essential as any workout in the gym. On the other hand, when sleep is cut short, the delicate balance of hunger hormones ghrelin and leptin is disrupted. Ghrelin, which increases appetite, rises, while leptin, which signals fullness, falls. The result is a stronger urge to eat, particularly sugary or high-calorie foods. Over time, this imbalance contributes to weight gain, obesity, and even diabetes. Sleep also serves as the guardian of the immune system. During sleep, the body produces and releases cytokines, proteins that help fight infection and inflammation. It strengthens immune memory, allowing the body to recognize and respond more effectively to future threats. A person who consistently sacrifices sleep is far more likely to catch colds, flu, and other illnesses, because their body's defense system is operating without reinforcement. Even vaccines are less effective in sleep-deprived individuals, as the body fails to build strong, lasting immunity. The heart, too, beats in rhythm with sleep. During deep sleep, blood pressure drops, heart rate slows, and the cardiovascular system is given a chance to rest. This nightly pause is critical, because it lowers the risk of hypertension, heart disease, and stroke. When sleep is missing, the opposite occurs. The heart is forced to work overtime, blood pressure remains elevated, and stress hormones such as cortisol flood the system. Over weeks, months, or years, this unrelenting strain wears down the heart, creating silent damage that can one day erupt into crisis. In the United States today, millions of people push through their days onto little sleep, believing that they can outsmart biology with caffeine, willpower, or sheer determination. College students stay awake to cram for exams. Night shift workers keep the economy running while the rest of the country sleeps. Busy parents and professionals often shave off hours of rest to keep up with responsibilities. The cultural message is clear: sleep is optional, even wasteful. Yet science tells us otherwise. Every lost hour of sleep is a withdrawal from the body's biological bank account, and eventually, the debt must be paid. To understand the essential role of sleep, consider this: every creature on Earth with a nervous system, from tiny fruit flies to whales in the ocean, sleeps in some form. Sleep is so universal, so deeply rooted in biology, that it must serve a function too vital to abandon. Evolution, after all, does not preserve behaviors that serve no purpose. The fact that sleep remains constant across species, despite the dangers of being unconscious and vulnerable, suggests that its role is fundamental to survival itself. Even the patterns of sleep are finely tuned to our biology. Humans, like many animals, are governed by circadian rhythms, internal clocks, set roughly to the cycle of day and night. These rhythms influence when we feel alert, when we feel tired, when our hormones rise and fall, and when our bodies are primed for rest. Disturbing these rhythms, such as through shift work or excessive screen time late at night, disrupts sleep's natural flow, with consequences that ripple through every aspect of health. Sleep is also the silent healer of the mind. During REM sleep, when dreams often occur, the brain processes emotions, helping us work through fears, stress, and trauma. This is one reason why, after a difficult day, a good night's sleep can bring a sense of clarity and relief. Deprive the brain of this process, and emotional wounds remain raw, anxiety deepens, and the ability to cope with stress begins to crumble. In this way, sleep is not just rest, but therapy, a nightly session in which the brain restores balance to our emotional world. What makes sleep essential, then, is not one single function, but the countless ways in which it supports life. It clears the brain, secures memory, balances hormones, strengthens immunity, protects the heart, and stabilizes emotions. It is the invisible foundation on which every waking moment stands. Without it, the human body begins to fail, and the mind begins to unravel. The first 24 hours without sleep may not seem like much. Many of us have stayed up late for work, for travel, or perhaps to enjoy a long night with friends, believing that a single night of lost sleep is nothing more than a minor inconvenience. But in truth, even within this short window, profound changes begin to ripple through the body and mind. The very fabric of our functioning starts to fray, and the effects, though subtle at first, reveal just how essential sleep is to our survival. When a person passes beyond the natural limit of wakefulness, usually around 16 to 18 hours, the brain begins to slow down in ways that are both measurable and deeply felt. Cognitive functions, attention, memory, and problem-solving start to weaken. Imagine trying to think clearly while a thick fog rolls across your mind, clouding each thought and obscuring the sharpness of focus. This is the first sign that sleep has been withheld. The neurons that once fired with precision now begin to misfire, sending signals less efficiently. Simple tasks require more effort, and complex decisions, once manageable, suddenly feel overwhelming. The brain's prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for judgment and reasoning, one of the earliest to falter. This means that within a single day of missed sleep, a person's ability to make sound decisions is already compromised. A driver on the road may misjudge distances, a student may miscalculate answers, and a worker may overlook critical details. Studies have shown that staying awake for 24 hours impairs performance to a degree comparable to having a blood alcohol concentration of 0.1% higher than the legal driving limit in the United States. In effect, the sleep-deprived brain behaves as though it were intoxicated. Beyond cognition, mood begins to shift. Irritability creeps in, patience wears thin, and emotions start to run unchecked. The amygdala, a small almond-shaped structure deep in the brain that governs emotional reactivity, becomes overactive. At the same time, the connection between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex weakens, meaning that emotional impulses are less restrained by reason. This is why, after a night without sleep, arguments flare more easily, frustrations mount, and small inconveniences feel insurmountable. The emotional stability that sleep provides has already begun to unravel, and the world feels heavier, more difficult to navigate. On a physical level, the body registers the loss of sleep in ways that may feel subtle, but are nonetheless significant. Reaction times slow, making tasks that require coordination and precision more dangerous. This is particularly evident in driving, where sleep-deprived individuals are far more likely to drift off course or fail to respond quickly to hazards. In the United States, drowsy driving contributes to thousands of accidents each year, many of them deadly. What makes this so insidious is that individuals often believe they are still capable of functioning normally, unaware of how impaired they truly are. The immune system also begins to show signs of weakness after just one day without rest. Levels of natural killer cells, the immune system's first line of defense against infections and abnormal cells, decline. Cytokine production, which helps regulate immune response, is disrupted. This means that even after a single sleepless night, the body is less prepared to fight off illness. For someone who believes that skipping sleep is harmless, the truth is that even one night leaves the body more vulnerable than before. Metabolic changes occur almost immediately as well. The body becomes less sensitive to insulin, making it harder to regulate blood sugar levels. This is the beginning of a cascade that, if repeated over time, can contribute to diabetes and metabolic disease. Hunger hormones shift, with ghrelin rising to increase appetite and leptin falling to decrease satiety. Within 24 hours, a person is already more likely to crave high-calorie foods, particularly those rich in sugar and fat, as the body attempts to compensate for its energy deficit. The irony is that the very foods the body craves after lost sleep are the ones that, if indulged too often, lead to long-term harm. The cardiovascular system also senses the strain. Blood pressure rises, heart rate increases, and levels of cortisol, the stress hormone, begin to surge. The body is entering a state of alert, as though it were under threat, simply because it has been deprived of sleep. This fight or flight response may keep a person awake and moving, but it comes at a cost. The heart is forced to work harder, and the balance that sleep would normally restore has been disrupted. Even after a single day, the seeds of long-term cardiovascular stress are being planted. Neurologically, One of the most striking features of the first 24 hours without sleep is the onset of what are known as microsleeps. These are brief, uncontrollable lapses into sleep that last only a few seconds. During a microsleep, the brain essentially shuts down momentarily, even if the eyes remain open. A person may not even realize that it has happened, but in those moments, awareness is lost. This is particularly dangerous when operating machinery, driving, or even performing routine tasks. The body is attempting to seize fragments of the rest it desperately needs, sneaking them in wherever it can, regardless of the consequences. The circadian rhythm, our internal biological clock, also plays a powerful role during this time. Normally, the rhythm drives a cycle of alertness and fatigue across the day and night, helping us feel awake during daylight and sleepy in the dark. When a person skips a night of sleep, they are forcing themselves to fight against this deeply ingrained rhythm. By the early morning hours, when the body expects rest, fatigue becomes overwhelming. The eyes grow heavy, concentration slips, and the battle to remain awake intensifies. Caffeine may offer temporary relief, but it cannot replace the restorative processes of sleep. Instead, it merely masks the symptoms, often followed by a sharp crash once its effects wear off. Emotionally, the absence of sleep begins to erode resilience. Tasks that once felt manageable seem daunting. Social interactions become strained, not because others have changed, but because the mind is no longer equipped to regulate emotion with its usual stability. Anxiety often rises, fueled by an overactive stress response and a lack of emotional regulation. Depression-like symptoms may also appear, with a sense of hopelessness or low energy seeping into thought. For some, this can be a quiet shift, hardly noticeable. For others, it may feel like the world itself has turned darker, heavier, more difficult to endure. In workplaces across America, the effects of a single sleepless night ripple outward in ways both visible and invisible. Productivity drops, mistakes multiply, and accidents become more likely. Yet the culture of long hours, late nights, and endless deadlines often disguises these costs, framing them instead as signs of dedication and hard work. The truth, however, is that the body is not designed to function without sleep, and the consequences appear sooner than most expect. In hospitals, where doctors and nurses often work extended shifts, the risks become especially evident. Medical errors increase after long hours without sleep, sometimes with life-altering consequences for patients. In aviation, pilots are closely monitored for fatigue, because even the smallest lapse can lead to disaster. In the military, sleep deprivation has been studied as both a tool and a hazard, demonstrating just how profoundly it affects human performance. All of these examples reveal the same truth. Within the first 24 hours of wakefulness, the human body begins to betray the illusion of endurance, showing signs of strain that cannot be ignored. The mind, too, begins to experience distortions of perception. Time seems to slow or blur, concentration drifts, and details slip away. Conversations may feel harder to follow, words more difficult to find. These subtle lapses, though they may not seem dangerous in isolation, compound into a greater whole. They reveal that the brain is struggling, that its carefully orchestrated processes are unraveling under the weight of fatigue. In many ways, the first day without sleep offers a glimpse into what lies ahead. The body and mind, though resilient, are already bending under the pressure. The illusions of clarity and control are fading, and the hidden costs of missed rest are beginning to show themselves in ways both obvious and invisible. 2 full days without sleep marks a turning point for the human body and mind. What began as subtle lapses and irritations after 24 hours now deepens into something heavier, more destabilizing, and far more dangerous. At this stage, the brain and body are no longer simply tired, they are in a state of biological crisis. The natural rhythm of life has been disrupted, and the machinery of survival begins to falter. When a person crosses the 48-hour threshold of wakefulness, the first and most noticeable effect is the collapse of sustained attention. The ability to focus on a task, to hold information in mind, and to stay anchored in the present moment becomes extremely fragile. Thoughts slip away mid-sentence. Instructions are forgotten as soon as they are given, and the act of following through with even simple tasks becomes increasingly unreliable. What was once a steady current of thought is now interrupted by gaps, silences, and sudden lapses. Memory also suffers acutely at this stage. The brain, which relies on sleep to consolidate and organize the day's experiences, can no longer keep track of details. Short-term memory falters, names are forgotten, numbers misplaced, and directions lost. The hippocampus, a region deeply involved in memory formation, becomes less active without sleep. Imagine a librarian trying to catalog books in a darkened library, unable to see clearly, placing volumes in the wrong shelves, or losing them altogether. This is what the sleep-deprived brain experiences: a collapse in its ability to preserve and retrieve information. The most striking development after 48 hours is the invasion of micro-sleeps. These are not occasional moments but near constant interruptions, brief seizures of unconsciousness that can last anywhere from a fraction of a second to half a minute. The individual may not even realize it has happened, but in those moments the brain simply shuts down. Eyes may remain open, but awareness vanishes. Micro-sleeps can strike at any time while reading, while eating, while speaking, or while driving a car at high speed on a busy highway. It is the body's desperate attempt to claim fragments of rest, no matter the situation, no matter the danger. Hallucinations often begin to appear during the second day of sleeplessness. These may start as fleeting illusions, shadows shifting in the corner of the eye, flashes of light, or indistinct sounds, but as time wears on, they can evolve into full visual or auditory experiences. A person may see patterns moving on walls, hear voices in empty rooms, or feel sensations on their skin that have no external source. This is the brain misfiring, trying to fill in the gaps created by exhaustion, weaving stories and images out of noise. The line between reality and imagination begins to blur, and with it, the sense of control over one's own mind. Emotionally, the individual becomes volatile. The amygdala, already overactive after one day without sleep, now fires with little restraint, amplifying anger, sadness, and fear. Small frustrations can trigger outbursts, and situations that would normally feel manageable become overwhelming. Some may experience sudden bursts of laughter or tears without cause, while others sink into a flat, joyless state, unable to feel pleasure or interest. The capacity to regulate emotions, to remain balanced and steady, is stripped away, leaving the individual at the mercy of raw, unchecked impulses. The body, too, reveals deeper cracks. Hormonal imbalances worsen, with cortisol rising to keep the body in a constant state of stress. The immune system is further suppressed, reducing the number and activity of cells that defend against infection. Blood sugar regulation continues to weaken, and the cravings for high-calorie food intensify, as if the body were frantically seeking energy wherever it can. Muscles ache, coordination declines, and simple movements feel heavier, slower, more difficult. Even speech may begin to slur, with words stumbling off the tongue as though the mind can no longer guide them smoothly. At this stage, the cardiovascular system remains under heavy strain. Elevated blood pressure and increased heart rate become more pronounced, and the balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems tilts heavily toward overactivation. The body is living in fight or flight mode, as though under constant threat, burning resources at a rate it cannot sustain. Fatigue presses down on every cell, but the body has no chance to restore itself, no opportunity to rebuild what has been lost. Decision-making becomes reckless and erratic. Without the stabilizing influence of sleep, the prefrontal cortex, the brain's executive control center, loses much of its influence. The result is behavior that veers toward risk-taking, impulsiveness, and poor judgment. A person may gamble with choices they would never normally consider, or fail to recognize dangers that would otherwise be obvious. In workplaces, in homes, and on highways, these decisions can have catastrophic consequences, social interactions become increasingly strained after 48 hours without rest. Communication falters, not only because memory and focus are impaired, but also because emotional control has dissolved. Conversations are littered with pauses, repetitions, and mistakes. Irritability turns into conflict, and misunderstandings multiply. For someone deprived of sleep, the world begins to feel hostile, not because others have changed, but because the exhausted brain interprets neutral interactions as threatening or negative. This distortion of perception deepens the isolation, creating a feedback loop of stress and disconnection. The sensory world itself begins to alter. Colors may seem too bright, sounds too loud, or touch too sharp. Time loses its steady rhythm, stretching in some moments and collapsing in others. The continuity of experience, normally so reliable, becomes fragmented. This sensory distortion adds to the growing sense of unreality, leaving the individual disoriented, unsteady, and detached from the flow of daily life. In the United States, where long work shifts and sleepless nights are often seen as a badge of honor, the toll of 48 hours without sleep can be found in countless corners of society. Doctors on call, truck drivers crossing states, soldiers on extended duty, and emergency workers responding to crises all confront this threshold. The risks they face are not only personal but collective, because one mistake, one lapse, one microsleep can ripple outward and endanger others. Studies have documented sharp increases in workplace accidents, medical errors, and traffic collisions once workers or drivers cross into the second day without rest. The human cost is measured not only in fatigue, but in lives altered or lost. Psychologically, the effects of 48 hours awake can mimic certain psychiatric conditions. The hallucinations, mood swings, and cognitive impairments resemble symptoms of psychosis, making it difficult to distinguish between sleep deprivation and mental illness in some cases. This resemblance underscores how deeply sleep is tied to sanity itself. Without it, the scaffolding of thought and emotion collapses into confusion and chaos. The circadian rhythm, strained after the first day, is now completely disrupted. The body no longer knows when to expect rest or wakefulness, and the internal clock begins to lose its grip. Hormonal signals that normally rise and fall in harmony with the day become erratic. Melatonin, the hormone that signals sleep, no longer finds its cue, and cortisol surges at inappropriate times. The body is unmoored from its natural cycles, adrift in a disordered rhythm that confuses every system it governs. In this state, creativity and abstract thought vanish. The brain, stripped of its normal integration, can no longer connect ideas fluidly. Instead of insight, there is rigidity. Instead of imagination, there is repetition. The mind becomes trapped in loops, replaying the same thought over and over, unable to break free. This rigidity is one reason problem-solving collapses at this stage. The brain is simply too exhausted to explore alternatives or adapt to new challenges. For the person enduring 48 hours without sleep, the world becomes a more fragile, unstable place. Every step, every word, every choice is colored by exhaustion. The foundation of daily life, attention, memory, emotion, coordination, crumbles in their absence. What was once taken for granted, the effortless ability to think, feel, and act with coherence, is now fractured, exposing the raw fragility of the human condition when deprived of one of its most essential needs. After 72 hours without sleep, the human body and mind are pushed into a realm that very few people willingly explore. At this stage, sleep deprivation is no longer a matter of fatigue or irritability, it is a full-scale neurological and physiological breakdown. The world itself begins to shift into something unfamiliar, disjointed, and unreliable. Perception, cognition, and emotion all bend under the strain, and the individual feels themselves drifting further from the stability of reality. The most immediate effect at this point is the collapse of coherent thought. Words begin to lose their structure, sentences drift into confusion, and concentration is nearly impossible to sustain. The brain, which depends on sleep to refresh its networks, is now working with depleted resources, like a machine grinding against its own limits. Simple arithmetic may feel impossible, instructions dissolve mid-thought, and conversations collapse into fragments. Even the effort to stay awake feels like a monumental challenge, as though every cell is resisting the command to remain conscious. Hallucinations, which may have begun after 48 hours, now become vivid and unavoidable. The brain, desperate for input and unable to distinguish between external reality and internal imagery, begins to create its own world. A person may see figures standing in the distance, hear voices calling their name, or feel textures on their skin that do not exist. Visual distortions become common, objects appear to move. Colors may shift. Patterns ripple across surfaces. In this state, the boundary between waking life and dreamlike visions dissolves, pulling the individual into a hallucinatory haze that feels both real and unreal. Paranoia also begins to take hold. Because the prefrontal cortex is deeply impaired, and because the amygdala is overactive, the individual's perception of the world becomes hostile. Neutral glances may feel threatening. Shadows may carry menace, and ordinary sounds may be misinterpreted as signs of danger. This paranoia is not easily dismissed, because the exhausted brain lacks the resources to question or correct it. In many cases, it becomes overwhelming, leading to fear, mistrust, and withdrawal from others. The emotional landscape at 72 hours without sleep is one of instability and volatility. Mood swings can occur within minutes, laughter turning into tears, calmness collapsing into anger, indifference morphing into despair. Some may feel detached, emotionally numb, while others are overwhelmed by feelings so intense they can barely be contained. The ability to regulate emotion, already weakened after one day, is now nearly absent. Every feeling is magnified, raw, and unpredictable, leaving the individual at the mercy of their own biology. The immune system, already weakened after one day, now severely compromised. Natural killer cell activity plummets, and the body struggles to defend against even mild threats. Inflammatory markers rise, creating strain across tissues and organs. If an infection were to take hold during this period, the body would be ill-prepared to mount an effective response. This vulnerability is one of the reasons prolonged sleep deprivation can become life-threatening. Metabolic and hormonal chaos deepens as well. Insulin sensitivity continues to decline, blood sugar fluctuates wildly, and cravings for sugar and fat dominate. Cortisol remains elevated, keeping the body locked in a stress response that was never meant to last so long. Appetite hormones remain imbalanced, driving hunger even as energy reserves collapse. Over time, this hormonal storm begins to erode not only immediate health, but the longer-term balance that sustains weight, metabolism, and overall vitality. The cardiovascular system, strained after 48 hours, is now under constant pressure. Elevated blood pressure, rapid heart rate, and increased risk of arrhythmias begin to take shape. The heart, unable to find the nightly reprieve it requires, operates as though it were under constant duress. For individuals with pre-existing conditions, the stage of deprivation can be especially dangerous, heightening the risk of cardiac events. Cognitively, decision-making is no longer reliable. The brain, deprived of rest for 3 days, loses the ability to evaluate risks clearly. Choices are made impulsively, often without logic or foresight. A person may act in ways that seem irrational or self-destructive, not because they intend harm, but because their brain no longer has the capacity to weigh consequences effectively. This is the collapse of executive function, one of the brain's most sophisticated abilities, leaving behavior driven by impulse and emotion rather than reason. The circadian rhythm, completely disrupted after 72 hours, loses its grip on wakefulness and sleep cycles. The brain no longer recognizes when it should be alert and when it should rest. The distinction between day and night fades, and the individual feels trapped in a perpetual twilight state, half awake, half dreaming, but never fully present. This disorientation deepens the sense of unreality, as though time itself has fractured and lost its order. Psychologically, the person begins to enter a state that closely resembles psychosis. The hallucinations, paranoia, mood swings, and disordered thinking are nearly indistinguishable from certain psychiatric conditions. For this reason, sleep deprivation has often been studied in clinical contexts to understand the overlap between exhaustion and mental illness. What these studies reveal is that sleep is not merely a supportive process, but a pillar of sanity itself. Without it, the scaffolding of the mind collapses, and the very sense of self begins to erode. At 72 hours, microsleeps become relentless. The brain, unable to resist its need for rest, forces unconsciousness in frequent bursts. These episodes may last only seconds, but they occur repeatedly, often without warning. The individual may be in the middle of speaking, eating, or even walking when the brain shuts down. During these gaps, awareness vanishes completely. In situations where safety depends on constant vigilance, such as driving, working with machinery, or even crossing a busy street, these microsleeps can be deadly. Social connections unravel during this period. Conversations may become incoherent, as thoughts drift and words fail to connect. Others may find the sleep-deprived person difficult to understand or interact with, not realizing that the brain is simply too exhausted to maintain the flow of communication. Relationships suffer as irritability and paranoia push others away, and the individual feels increasingly isolated. The loneliness that follows only magnifies the psychological strain, creating a spiral of disconnection and distress. Creativity and problem-solving vanish almost entirely. Where the rested mind can draw connections and imagine new possibilities, the exhausted brain is trapped in repetition and rigidity. Ideas loop endlessly without resolution, and solutions remain out of reach. For artists, thinkers, and workers alike, the stage of deprivation reveals just how dependent creativity is on the restoration provided by sleep. The physical appearance of the individual also begins to reveal the toll. Eyes are bloodshot, skin appears pale or gray, and facial muscles sag with fatigue. The body projects exhaustion outwardly, making it impossible to conceal. Even posture is affected, with shoulders slumped and movements dragging as though weighted by invisible chains. The outward signs are simply the reflection of the deeper collapse occurring within. In this stage, the body and mind are crying out for reprieve. Every system is strained, every function diminished, every safeguard weakened. The illusion of endurance, so often celebrated in cultures that value productivity over rest, is shattered by the reality that no one can escape the need for sleep. The human body is not designed to go 72 hours without it, and by this point, survival itself feels precarious, as though every step forward is taken on the edge of collapse. The brain is the organ most profoundly affected by the absence of sleep. Though every system in the body suffers when rest is withheld, it is within the folds of the brain that the deepest and most dramatic changes occur. The brain is not simply a passenger in the experience of sleep deprivation. It is the command center unraveling, the conductor without a baton, the very place where the loss of rest transforms into confusion, distortion, and collapse. To understand what happens when sleep is denied, one must first see the brain as an intricate ecosystem, billions of neurons firing, communicating, synchronizing, and resting. When that rhythm is broken, the entire ecosystem begins to fail. Neurons, the cells responsible for transmitting information, operate through a delicate balance of electrical and chemical signals. In a well-rested brain, these signals fire in coordinated patterns, creating the foundation for thought, memory, and awareness. After a prolonged period without sleep, however, neurons lose their efficiency. They misfire, sending signals either too weakly or too strongly, and sometimes failing to fire at all. The consequence is a disruption in communication. What was once a symphony of synchronized signals becomes scattered noise. This is why, during sleep deprivation, the brain feels foggy, slow, and unreliable. Thoughts lose their sharpness, memory fragments, and decision-making falters. One of the most striking discoveries in neuroscience is the role of sleep in clearing waste products from the brain. Throughout the day, as neurons fire and chemical reactions occur, toxic byproducts build up in the spaces between cells. Chief among these is beta amyloid, a protein that, in excess, is linked to neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's. The brain has a specialized system known as the glymphatic system that flushes out these toxins during deep sleep. Cerebrospinal fluid flows through channels between neurons, washing away the waste and restoring balance. When sleep is absent, this cleansing process does not occur. After even a single night, toxins begin to accumulate, and with longer deprivation, the buildup becomes more severe. The brain, deprived of its nightly cleaning, functions like a city where garbage is left to rot and the streets clogged, polluted, and increasingly dysfunctional. Memory is another casualty of sleeplessness. The hippocampus, a seahorse-shaped structure crucial for forming and storing memories, relies heavily on sleep to perform its function. During deep stages of rest, experiences from the day are replayed and integrated into long-term memory, strengthening neural connections and discarding irrelevant information. Without sleep, this process grinds to a halt. New information fails to take hold, and old memories become difficult to access. This is why students who pull all-nighters often find themselves unable to recall the very material they tried to learn, and why workers who skip rest forget tasks and instructions with alarming ease. Sleep is the brain's librarian, filing and preserving knowledge, and without it, the library descends into chaos. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for logic, reasoning, and executive function, is particularly vulnerable to sleep loss. In a rested state, this region exerts control over impulses, allowing for thoughtful decision-making and restraint. When sleep is deprived, the prefrontal cortex loses its grip, and other brain regions, particularly the amygdala, exert more influence. The amygdala is a center of emotion, especially fear and anger. With the prefrontal cortex weakened, emotional responses intensify, and rational control diminishes. This imbalance explains why sleep-deprived individuals are more irritable, or prone to conflict, and more likely to interpret neutral events as threatening. In essence, the brain shifts from measured, logical responses to raw, emotional reactivity. Hallucinations, which become more common after 2 or 3 days without sleep, are also products of the brain's unraveling. Visual and auditory cortices, deprived of restorative rest, begin to misinterpret signals. Random bursts of neural activity are mistaken for external stimuli, creating visions and sounds that do not exist. These hallucinations can be subtle, like flickers of light or faint whispers, or they can be vivid and immersive, indistinguishable from reality. The brain, exhausted and disoriented, loses the ability to filter noise from signal, perception from imagination. Another process disrupted by sleep deprivation is neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to adapt, change, and learn. In a well-rested state, sleep strengthens important neural connections while pruning away weaker or unnecessary ones. This balance ensures that the brain remains flexible, able to incorporate new knowledge while discarding clutter. When sleep is absent, plasticity suffers. New learning becomes nearly impossible, and the brain grows rigid, stuck in repetitive loops of thought. Problem solving, creativity, and adaptability all collapse, leaving the mind trapped in a narrower, less effective mode of operation. Attention, too, is deeply compromised. The brain relies on sleep to recharge networks involved in sustained focus. Without it, the ability to concentrate breaks down, and attention flickers uncontrollably. This is why a sleep-deprived person may find themselves staring blankly at a page or screen, reading the same line repeatedly without comprehension. Even tasks that normally feel automatic, such as driving or typing, become difficult to sustain. Micro-sleeps invade these lapses, pulling the brain into involuntary fragments of rest. During these moments, awareness disappears entirely, leaving dangerous gaps in perception and control. Emotionally, the brain under sleep deprivation becomes unstable, swinging between extremes. The weakened prefrontal cortex cannot regulate the overactive amygdala, leading to outbursts of anger, episodes of anxiety, and deepening sadness. Research has shown that lack of sleep amplifies negative emotional responses while dulling the capacity for positive ones. A rested brain can find joy and laughter even in small things, but a deprived brain struggles to feel satisfaction, creating a bias toward negativity. This emotional imbalance is one reason why chronic sleep deprivation is linked to depression. In other mood disorders, sleep also plays a crucial role in the regulation of neurotransmitters, chemicals that carry signals between neurons. Dopamine, which influences motivation and reward, becomes erratic without rest, leading to swings between apathy and impulsivity. Serotonin, tied to mood and emotional stability, declines, contributing to feelings of irritability and despair. Norepinephrine, which governs alertness, surges in the absence of sleep, creating a state of hypervigilance that keeps the body tense and uneasy. These chemical imbalances create a brain environment that is unstable, unpredictable, and increasingly disconnected from equilibrium. On a deeper level, sleep deprivation alters the brain's ability to perceive reality itself. Studies using brain imaging show that regions involved in sensory processing become hyperactive, while those responsible for integration and interpretation weaken. This imbalance creates distortions in perception. Sounds may feel amplified, visual patterns may appear distorted, and time itself may seem warped. The seamless continuity of reality fractures into a disjointed, unstable experience, leaving the individual unmoored from the world around them. The long-term risks of depriving the brain of sleep are profound. Chronic sleep loss has been linked to accelerated aging of brain tissue, increased risk of neurodegenerative diseases, and irreversible cognitive decline. Each sleepless night leaves behind traces of damaged waste products unflushed, connections unstrengthened, and circuits overstressed. Though the brain is resilient, it is not invincible, and over time, the burden of lost sleep accumulates, reshaping its structure and function in ways that cannot easily be undone. In the modern world, where sleeplessness is often worn as a badge of productivity, the brain suffers quietly. Workers who stay late into the night, students who push through until dawn, and professionals who sacrifice rest for deadlines all pay the price, even if they cannot feel it immediately. The sharpness of thought, the steadiness of mood, the clarity of perception all depend on sleep. Without it, the brain, that extraordinary organ of consciousness and creativity, crumbles into confusion and fragility. What emerges most clearly when examining the brain under sleep deprivation is this: sleep is not a luxury, not a passive pause, but a fundamental necessity for the brain's survival. It is the architect of memory, the regulator of emotion, the cleaner of toxins, and the guardian of sanity. Strip it away, and the brain cannot maintain its balance, its clarity, or its humanity. The mind itself begins to disintegrate, revealing how deeply the act of sleep is woven into the fabric of thought and being. When the body is deprived of sleep, the consequences ripple outward for beyond the brain. Sleep is not simply about mental restoration, it is a full body reset, touching every organ system, every hormone, and every cellular process. To withhold sleep is to throw the body into crisis, a silent emergency that grows more severe with every lost hour. The heart beats faster, the immune system weakens, metabolism falters, and the delicate chemistry that sustains life begins to unravel. What may seem like nothing more than a few restless nights is, in truth, a profound physiological disturbance that threatens health at its very core. One of the first systems to show signs of strain is the cardiovascular system. In a rested body, the heart rate slows during deep sleep, blood pressure dips, and blood vessels relax, giving the heart precious time to recover from the stress of the day. Without sleep, this nightly reset is lost. Blood pressure remains elevated. The heart pumps with greater force, and stress hormones surge unchecked. Over time, the cumulative effect is damaging. Chronic sleep deprivation is strongly linked to hypertension, irregular heart rhythms, and an increased risk of heart attack and stroke. Even after a single sleepless night, measurable changes can be detected. Blood vessels constrict more tightly, inflammation markers rise, and the heart works harder than it should. The body, denied rest, treats wakefulness as a state of constant vigilance, pushing the cardiovascular system toward exhaustion. The immune system also suffers profoundly. During sleep, the body produces infection-fighting cells and proteins, including cytokines, which play a vital role in coordinating immune responses. These substances not only combat invading pathogens, but also help reduce inflammation and promote healing. Without sufficient rest, cytokine production plummets, leaving the body more vulnerable to viruses and bacteria. This is why people who consistently sleep fewer than 6 hours a night are more likely to catch colds, develop infections, and take longer to recover from illness. In laboratory studies, participants deprived of sleep for several days showed a dramatic decline in immune function, their bodies struggling to mount even basic defenses. Sleep is, in many ways, the immune system's training ground, and without it, the body is left defenseless, exposed to threats it cannot adequately resist. Hormones, the chemical messengers of the body, are thrown into disarray as well. The regulation of hormones follows circadian rhythms, daily cycles influenced by light, darkness, and sleep. When sleep is denied, these rhythms collapse, leading to imbalances that affect everything from growth and metabolism to appetite and stress. Cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone, rises sharply during sleep deprivation, keeping the body in a state of alertness and tension. At the same time, leptin, the hormone that signals fullness, decreases, while ghrelin, the hormone that stimulates hunger, increases. The result is a powerful drive to eat, particularly foods high in sugar and fat, as the body desperately seeks quick sources of energy to fuel its sleepless state. This imbalance contributes directly to weight gain, obesity, and metabolic disorders such as type 2 diabetes. The absence of sleep does not simply make one tired. It reprograms the body to consume and store energy in harmful ways. The endocrine system suffers in other ways as well. Growth hormone, released primarily during deep sleep, plays a critical role in tissue repair, muscle growth, and cellular regeneration. When sleep is absent, the release of growth hormone is dramatically reduced, slowing the body's ability to heal injuries, rebuild tissue, and maintain strength. Testosterone, another hormone tied to both physical vitality and reproductive health, also declines with sleep deprivation, leading to reduced energy, decreased fertility, and impaired performance. For children and adolescents, whose bodies depend heavily on sleep to drive growth and development, the impact is especially severe. In a sleep-deprived state, the very processes that shape the body and prepare it for adulthood are stunted. Metabolism, the complex network of processes that convert food into energy, is thrown into turmoil without sleep. Insulin sensitivity decreases, meaning that cells become less efficient at absorbing glucose from the bloodstream. Blood sugar levels rise, straining the pancreas and increasing the risk of diabetes. The liver, responsible for regulating glucose and detoxifying the blood, also struggles without rest, its rhythms disrupted by the absence of nightly recovery. Even the gut microbiome, the vast community of bacteria living in the digestive tract, is altered by sleep deprivation. Studies show that lack of sleep changes the composition of these microbes, favoring species linked to inflammation, obesity, and metabolic disease. The digestive system, the circulatory system, the endocrine system all are bound together, and all are destabilized when sleep is lost. The musculoskeletal system, though less often discussed, is also profoundly impacted. Muscles accumulate microscopic damage during daily activity, and it is during sleep that this damage is repaired. Proteins are synthesized, tissues are rebuilt, and energy stores within muscle fibers are replenished. When sleep is absent, these processes are interrupted, leaving muscles weaker, more fatigued, and more prone to injury. Athletes who cut their sleep short see declines in performance, slower recovery times, and increased risk of strain and sprain. But even for non-athletes, the effects are clear. Everyday movements feel heavier, endurance decreases, and the body struggles to maintain strength. Joints and connective tissues, too, depend on sleep for recovery, and without it, aches, stiffness, and inflammation take hold. The skin, the body's largest organ, also shows visible signs of sleep loss. Collagen production slows without adequate rest, leading to dullness, fine lines, and a loss of elasticity. Blood flow to the skin decreases, reducing its natural glow and making dark circles and puffiness more apparent. Inflammation rises, worsening conditions like acne, eczema, and psoriasis. The phrase, beauty sleep, may sound like a cliché, but it carries truth. Without sleep, the skin ages more quickly, and its ability to protect and heal itself is diminished. What begins as subtle cosmetic changes can, over time, reflect deeper systemic issues within the body. Another crucial system disrupted by sleep deprivation is the reproductive system. In both men and women, sleep plays a key role in regulating fertility and sexual health. For men, sleep deprivation lowers testosterone and reduces sperm quality, impairing reproductive capacity. For women, irregular sleep disrupts menstrual cycles, alters hormone regulation, and can make conception more difficult. Pregnant women who experience chronic sleep disruption are at higher risk for complications such as preeclampsia and gestational diabetes. In essence, sleep is not just about sustaining the body day to day, it is about ensuring the continuity of life itself through reproductive health. The respiratory system also bears the burden of sleep deprivation. Sleep normally helps regulate breathing patterns and allows respiratory muscles to rest. Without it, breathing becomes less efficient, lung capacity decreases, and inflammatory responses in the airways intensify. Sleep-deprived individuals are more susceptible to respiratory infections like influenza and pneumonia, and for those with conditions such as asthma or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, lack of sleep can make symptoms significantly worse. Oxygen delivery throughout the body declines, leaving tissues undernourished and organs struggling to perform. Even the blood itself is altered in the absence of sleep. Levels of inflammatory markers rise. Platelets become more likely to clot, and red blood cell production slows. This combination creates a dangerous environment where blood becomes both sluggish and unstable, increasing the risk of clots and reducing the efficiency of oxygen delivery. The chemistry of the bloodstream mirrors the turmoil of the body as a whole, imbalanced, strained, and unable to maintain the smooth flow that health requires. In the modern age, sleep deprivation often goes unnoticed as a form of bodily crisis. The body does not scream or collapse immediately when deprived of rest. It adapts, quietly compensating, masking its exhaustion with short-term survival mechanisms. But beneath the surface, damage accumulates. The heart strains, the immune system weakens, hormones fall into chaos, and cells age faster than they should. What appears to be a functioning body on the outside is, on the inside, a system running on emergency power, a machine consuming its reserves with no chance to restore them. The mind is often seen as the most mysterious frontier of human existence, and sleep is one of the essential forces that holds it together. When the brain is denied rest, the fragile balance of thought, memory, and emotion begins to fracture. The unraveling is not immediate. It creeps in quietly, disguising itself at first as simple tiredness, a fleeting fog, a lack of focus. But with each passing hour without sleep, the disarray deepens. Circuits misfire, chemical messengers lose their rhythm, and the structures that maintain rational thought and emotional control begin to fail. What emerges is a portrait of the mind in slow collapse, not unlike a finely tuned orchestra falling into discord as the conductor walks away. In the early stages of sleep deprivation, the most noticeable effects lie in attention and concentration. The prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for decision-making, reasoning, and impulse control, relies heavily on sleep to function. When sleep is withheld, its activity decreases, leaving the mind less able to filter distractions, maintain focus, or juggle multiple tasks. A simple conversation feels more demanding, reading becomes more laborious, and reaction times grow slower. In these moments, the mind begins to slip from precision to imprecision, from clarity to confusion. The individual still functions, but less efficiently, as if walking through a world that has grown subtly blurred. Memory begins to unravel soon after. Short-term memory, which allows the brain to hold and process information for immediate use, is one of the first casualties. The hippocampus, the brain's memory hub, depends on sleep to consolidate new information and transfer it into long-term storage. Without sleep, the hippocampus falters and new memories dissolve almost as quickly as they are formed. Students who pull all-nighters discover this truth when they sit down for an exam and find entire chapters forgotten. Professionals working late into the night realize it when their minds refuse to recall crucial details. It is not laziness or lack of effort, it is simply the brain's inability to encode without the restorative power of sleep. As wakefulness drags on, emotional regulation begins to collapse. The amygdala, the brain's emotional center, becomes hyperactive in a sleep-deprived state, responding with greater intensity to negative stimuli. Small frustrations trigger outsized anger, minor disappointments provoke disproportionate sadness, and anxiety sharpens into panic with little provocation. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, the region that usually tempers emotional impulses, falls quiet. The result is a mind that feels emotions more strongly, but controls them less effectively. Irritability and mood swings become common companions, and over time, chronic sleep deprivation is strongly linked to depression, anxiety disorders, and other mental health conditions. Hallucinations emerge as the deprivation lengthens. After 72 hours without sleep, many individuals begin to see or hear things that are not there. At first, these may be fleeting shadows shifting at the edge of vision, faint whispers in the silence, but as the hours accumulate, the hallucinations intensify, weaving themselves into waking consciousness. The boundary between reality and imagination erodes, and the mind struggles to distinguish fact from illusion. This descent into altered perception highlights one of the brain's most fundamental needs, the nightly reset of sleep to recalibrate sensory input and restore rational order. Without it, reality itself begins to fray. Cognitive processes deteriorate in other ways as well. Problem-solving skills decline, creativity dwindles, and abstract thought becomes sluggish. The ability to plan for the future or weigh complex decisions is impaired, replaced by impulsivity and short-term thinking. In laboratory studies, sleep-deprived participants perform significantly worse on tasks that require innovative thinking or flexible reasoning. The mind, deprived of its nightly workshop, loses its ability to assemble new ideas or imagine new solutions. It becomes rigid, reactive, and prone to error. Perhaps one of the most insidious effects of sleep loss on the mind is the rise of microsleeps, brief, involuntary lapses into unconsciousness that can last a fraction of a second to several seconds. To the individual, they feel like a momentary blank space, a blink that lingers too long, but to the brain, they are desperate attempts to force rest into a state of unrelenting wakefulness. During microsleeps, awareness vanishes, and the mind is incapable of perceiving or responding to the environment. For someone driving a car, operating machinery, or even crossing a street, these brief moments can mean the difference between life and death. Microsleeps represent the brain's ultimate rebellion against forced wakefulness, fragments of sleep scattered into a waking state. Beyond cognition and perception, the deeper layers of consciousness are also disrupted. Dreams, which play a critical role in emotional processing and memory integration, are lost when sleep is denied. The brain is robbed of its nightly opportunity to rehearse challenges, resolve conflicts, and weave meaning into the events of the day. Over time, this deprivation of dreaming leaves the mind feeling increasingly fragmented, as if experiences have piled up without being properly sorted or stored. The psychological toll grows heavier, creating a sense of disconnection, emptiness, or unreality. The question, then, is not whether we can avoid sleep, but how long we can endure without it before systems fail. Unlike food or water deprivation, which lead to obvious signs of decline, sleep loss deceives us with illusions of competence. People believe they are managing, unaware that their reactions are slower, their thoughts less sharp, and their emotions more volatile. The danger lies not just in the decline itself, but in our inability to recognize it. This blindness makes sleep deprivation a silent threat, one that corrodes beneath the surface until the damage is undeniable. For the individual, the non-negotiable nature of sleep is experienced in moments both subtle and profound. It is in the sigh of relief when clarity returns after a good night's rest, in the surge of creativity that follows dreaming, in the steadiness of emotion when the body has been restored. These are reminders that sleep is not lost time but reclaimed vitality. Each hour spent in slumber is an investment in strength, resilience, and longevity. To view it otherwise is to misunderstand the very architecture of human health. In the end, sleep is non-negotiable because it is the foundation upon which every other pursuit rests. Without it, the body weakens, the mind unravels, and the spirit dims. With it, health is fortified, cognition is sharpened, and life itself is prolonged. Sleep is not simply part of living, it is what makes living possible, what transforms existence from survival into flourishing, what allows the human story to continue without collapse, and what connects the silent hours of night to the fullness of day. And so, as we journey back through the landscapes of sleeplessness, we see how fragile, and yet how extraordinary, the human body truly is. In the first restless hours, it whispers warnings, slower thoughts, heavier eyes, a mind that begins to wander. By the second night, the body grows louder, demanding attention with memory lapses, surging emotions, and a brain that slips into micro-sleeps against our will. Push further still, and the world itself begins to distort. Hallucinations take root, paranoia creeps in, and the delicate threads that hold perception together start to fray. Science reveals that this unraveling is not only in the mind, but in every corner of the body. The immune system falters, the heart strains, metabolism wavers, and the very cells of the brain become clogged with waste. Sleep deprivation is not simply fatigue. It is a slow dismantling of the systems that allow us to live, think, and feel. Yet, at the center of this truth is something deeply reassuring. The recognition that sleep is always there, waiting to restore us. Each night, when we close our eyes, the body engages in a ritual as ancient as life itself. The heart steadies, the brain cleanses, the immune system recharges, and the mind dreams. Sleep is not wasted time, it is life's most profound form of renewal. What happens if you never sleep is a warning. But what happens when you do sleep is a promise. A promise of clarity, a promise of resilience, a promise of years added to your life and life added to your years. Sleep is the quiet healer, the invisible guardian, and the foundation upon which every pursuit, health, happiness, love, and purpose truly depends. So tonight, when you lay your head down, know that you are not turning away from life, but returning to it. Sleep is not negotiable because it is not optional, it is survival, it is strength, and it is the truest form of self-care.